This is the Pandora Papers, because we think we're opening a box on a lot of things. We're looking at about 12 million documents from 14 different service providers. These are law firms, firms that set up secret offshore accounts for people all over the world. I'm Gerard Ryle. I'm the director of the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. Well, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists has been looking at this issue for longer than any other media organisation has ever looked at a topic. I think we've been looking at it now for 10 years. We had learned about the existence of this source before we met them. But once I managed to talk to the source, I realised that we were looking at something bigger than anything we thought possible. The source wanted two things. First of all, the source wanted anonymity, I presume for safety reasons. And the second thing is that I was told that he wanted to make these documents available to governments all over the world. And this was the best way of doing it, by going to journalists. Well, it's important for lots of different reasons. I think what it shows really is that there is a shadow economy, a shadow world out there that we are not aware of, and that this is a world that is enriching the people who are already rich. And I think what we're seeing here is a lot of hypocrisy. When we published the Panama Papers a few years ago, there was a lot of outcry around the world saying that this was a system that needed to end. But we're now seeing that the very people who could end the system are themselves benefiting from it. I think you're seeing that the political will isn't there because the politicians themselves are using this. We're seeing current and former world leaders, we're seeing politicians from more than 100 different countries in the documents. There's no incentive for them to actually end it. We're talking about presidents, we're talking about prime ministers, we're talking about rock stars, we're talking about porn stars, and people that have been convicted of crimes all over the world. And what they're doing here is using this offshore secrecy to stop their crimes and to hide their crimes from governments and from the people. I guess it mostly demonstrates that the people that could end the secrecy of offshore, could end what's going on, end the criminality, are themselves benefiting from it, so there's no incentive for them to end it. Well, the offshore world exacerbates poverty. It leads to inequality. When countries are robbed over their riches, it leads to all sorts of things like refugee crises. Basically, all of the evils of the world can be traced back to the system, and there doesn't seem to be a purpose to the system except to enrich some people. We think this is one of the most important stories in the world, and we don't think it's been told properly yet. And so if we offered information from somebody that will allow us to shed more light on this topic, we think it's in our remit to do it. It's also something that a little non-profit like ours can actually focus on. Most media these days, we can only focus on a story for so long and then have to move on, whereas when you're working for a non-profit, it's topics that you tend to stay with, and this is a topic that is of great interest to the world and of great interest to us. I think if we ended secrecy, it would go a long way to ending money laundering internationally. And the problem is that police forces can only chase as far as their borders, and as soon as their borders end, they can't go any further. And that is the power of the offshore world for criminals, because they know that if they can bury a crime through 2 or 3 different layers of offshore shell companies, that no one will ever find out what really happened. I think it's important for journalists to look at, when we're presented with secrets, to really report it out and to report deeply on them, because if someone is trying to hide something, then it is actually our job to make sure it isn't hidden, and particularly if it involves public figures. I keep coming back, it has to have public interest. We're not interested in someone's private affairs. But when we're looking at these records, we're not looking at private affairs, we're looking at things that should be made public.